Hello and welcome to the National Security Conversation. On Monday, the 6th of December, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited New Delhi for the India-Russia Annual Summit. The two countries signed a total of 28 agreements, renewing the military technical cooperation for another decade till 2031. Earlier in the day, the foreign and defense ministers of India and Russia met for the inaugural 2+2 dialogue. Russia is the only country outside the Quad with which India has an established a 2+2 dialogue. Last month, Russia started the delivery of the much-awaited S-400 missile defense systems to India. India went ahead with the deal despite the threat of CATSA sanctions from the United States. At the summit, Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, said that the world has undergone several geopolitical changes, but the India-Russia friendship remained unchanged. While there is some substance to this argument by Mr. Modi, there are also uncertainties and tensions behind this symbolism. Russia's closer ties with the Chinese and India's greater alignment with the United States in the Indo-Pacific are creating structural challenges for India-Russia bilateral partnership. And yet, the prospects for collaboration remain. Both Russia and India are aware of the risks of placing all their eggs in the China basket or the US basket. There is a strategic imperative for the two countries to hedge their bets and collaborate in Central Asia and the Indian Ocean region, where their interests diverge from those of China and the United States to some extent. To discuss the state of India-Russia relations, the structural difficulties that are beginning to strain them, and explore areas for greater strategic cooperation, I have with me Mr. Nandan Unnikrishnan. Nandan Unnikrishnan is a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. He began his career as a journalist with the Press Trust of India, PTI. During his time with the PTI, he was the organization's Moscow bureau chief. Needless to say that Nandan is one of our best Russia experts in Delhi. Welcome to the National Security Conversation, Nandan Unnikrishnan.
Thank you for inviting me, Happymon.
Nandan, let's sort of begin with what your opinion are on some of the key takeaways from the India-Russia Annual Summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. In what is considered to be, probably the only second visit that President Putin undertook since the beginning of the pandemic.
Well, I think there was a lot of symbolism imbued in the relationship. In the visit before he even came. Prior to his arrival, India and Russia, they did this delicate two-step. In 2019, Putin bestowed Russia's highest honor on Mr. Modi, the Order of St. Andrew. He also attended Prime Minister Modi's chairing a session on maritime issues at the UN. He was the only foreign leader who attended that. And head of state, head of government level, who attended that session. And on the other hand, we have reciprocated at the UN itself when we supported the Russians when a resolution was placed by Ukraine and several countries against Russia and its human rights record in Crimea. We voted with the Russians, surprisingly. China abstained, Central Asia abstained. Just as a curious aside, someone told me that the Tajik ambassador had an urgent need to go to the bathroom when voting was taking place. So, India in that sense could have happily abstained with 90 other countries, but India chose to vote for Russia against the resolution. The second thing is, a couple of days later, we co-sponsored with Russia a resolution on against glorification of Nazism, fascism. So India also, undertook certain steps And this is a resolution which is, by the way, has a lot of history to it, because Western countries, although they are opposed to fascism, did not vote for this resolution because Russia had sponsored it. So once
Interesting.
again, India found itself on the other side of the fence from the United States, with which it's seeking closer and closer ties, as you pointed out in your introduction. So it's interesting. There is this delicate dance going on between Russia and India in navigating the structural problems that the churn in international affairs is causing. But symbolism apart, I think you touched very rightly on the issue that these challenges had to be dealt with, and it was important because many issues were pending. It was important that the leadership meets at the highest level and tries and removes some of the impediments to what you described as the potential of the relationship.
Nandan, let me do a little bit of honest stock taking here. The India-Russia bilateral trade is around $10 billion, far lower than India's trade with China and the US, China's trade with the US and Russia, and even the US trade with Russia. The Soviet era people-to-people and cultural contacts between Russia and India have almost entirely evaporated. A legacy relationship, as it were, that India enjoys with Russia today, based on limited interaction, might eventually lose the warmth, given that there is very little organic people-to-people content to the relationship. So unless the bilateral ties can move beyond arms sale and purchase, a phase of stasis will kick in sooner than later in India-Russia relations. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think only someone who's total nowadays modern days in India, we use the word bhakt for anything. So, only a total nostalgia-driven person about the Indo-Soviet relationship would say that no, everything is hunky-dory in our ties with Russia. There are problems, and some of them are serious. But my only emphasis here would be on there was trade and investment faces a structural problem. There is no connectivity between direct connectivity between Russia and India. However, now in the past 3-4 years, there have been several initiatives to try and sort of bridge this gap. One is the announcement in 2019 of the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime corridor, which has curious effect on the whole Indo-Pacific concept the Russians are so hostile to. And also, of course, re-energizing the North-South corridor and getting Chabahar port to be included in the project, because the North-South corridor is essentially about Bandar Abbas. So there are structural problems, but trade could have been higher. In the past 3 or 4 years, I would say, actually 2.5, 3 years, I think the leaderships of both countries have understood that merely trading arms, as you pointed out, without a solid economic base would lead to eventually a stagnation or a stasis in the relationship. That, if you look at the joint statement that has been issued by Mr. Modi and Putin at the end of the summit, I think clearly addresses some of those issues. The need for connectivity, the need for stronger banking ties, the need for Russia to participate in India's Make in India program, we participating in joint projects in the Far East. So there is a much greater urgency reflected in the moves by both leaderships to re-engage economic ties. And you're right, economic ties are not anywhere commensurate with the potential. When the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, India was their primary trading partner. I mean, rather, Soviet Union was our primary trading partner. So we have a lot of catching up to do. But at the same time, I would not be as skeptical as you were in describing the current situation.
Right. So let's put it this way: the Soviet era, Indo-Soviet nostalgia is not going to take the relationship forward. There is very little economic partnership that India and China has. As you said, there are structural impediments to improving India-Russia trade. So at the end of the there is very little people-to-people connect, as it were. So at the end of the day, we are basically talking about arms trade and purchase. So if India tomorrow were to sort of diversify arms procurement and and therefore the purchase that we have from or procurement that we have from Russia comes down as it did a few years ago. Do you think the warmth in the relationship that Russia stands by India to some extent and India sort of stands by Russia to some extent, will that reduce? So put differently, what is behind the fact that Russia stands by India in various international forums?
I think, Happymon, you summarized it actually in the beginning. The world is going through an unprecedented churn, and the emergence of what in the old days Marxists would call the emergence of a new primary contradiction between China and the United States, right? And in that context, India and Russia are not the most important players. Clearly, the other two are. And so India and Russia need to measure their steps to ensure that they retain what we in India call strategic autonomy. And if you look at it structurally again, to maintain that strategic autonomy, the relationship between India and Russia becomes a very important axis, which gives each of us strategic space, if you want, vis-a-vis the other two players, allows us to exercise a certain amount of strategic autonomy. That's point number one. Point number two I would like to make is, I think again, I'm not being facetious when I say that while skepticism about trade itself is a healthy thing to do because it has to improve, I think the breadth and the depth of the Indo-Russian relationship goes well beyond arms trade. You look at the joint statement, 99 paragraphs, of which I would say 98 or 97 were substantial. And in those 97, 37 are devoted to economic issues. There are some to defense. There is discussion on civil nuclear energy. Which other country is operating with us? Operating, I mean, not just talking about it, operating in India in the civil nuclear energy sector. Which country is willing to talk to us, not only talk to us, but participate with us in a nuclear project in a third country, like we are doing in Ropur in Bangladesh, right? So therefore, there are...
I completely agree with you. I see your point. What I'm trying to get at is, so if you take the arms sale and purchase out of the equation, what is the driving force behind the relationship? And I'm trying to get at that source. What is the magic source here?
My point is slightly different, that the driving force comes even before the arms sale. Arms sale is part of that. The driving force is the requirement for India and Russia in the new emerged situation to maintain each other's relationship, to create strategic space vis-a-vis the other two big, elephants in the room, China and the United States. Neither of us wants to be an ally of each other. We do not want to see the emergence of a hegemon anywhere in the world, particularly in Asia or the Indo-Pacific, because this is our environment. The Russians completely share that with you. So the importance of the relationship is primarily strategic. Then you start imbuing the relationship with other elements to keep it going and get warmth, as you described it. So you have arms, you have trade, you have cooperation in science and technology, space, and multiple other things. The third point I was going to make is, yes, people-to-people contacts are not as much as they were during Soviet times. But if you remember, in Soviet times, those ties were primarily academic. and Indian students going to study because the Soviets gave them wonderful scholarships. But today you have an entirely different type of exchange. You have tremendous tourism from India in Russia. If you just look at the numbers, I don't think even at the height of Indo-Soviet relations, the two countries exchanged even 1/10 of the number of tourists that we exchange today. I mean, I am sitting in Goa at one beach here, so I don't remember the name. All the signage, along with English, there's a lot of Russian signage. I, in fact, was resentful of it. I said, this is, my country. Why am I reading Russian? Yes, I feel well disposed to Russians. But, if I went to a beach somewhere else and I saw Chinese, I would resent it. So why should I see it in Russian also? But it's just, the point I'm making is, it reflects the number of Russians Russian citizens that are enjoying Goa. Similarly, if you go to Moscow or St. Petersburg, there is not one tourist attraction at which you will not find 30, 40 Indians. Now, this was something you would not find in Soviet times. So I think there is an appreciation growing about each other, at least amongst the middle classes.
Right. I think that's an interesting point that you made, Nandan, in the beginning about the geopolitical aspect of this relationship. I mean, you're talking about a kind of a quad here, right? Talking about India, China, United States, and Russia. And if you look at that quad, there are six levels of interaction here, six levels of bilateral sort of partnerships here. The whole quad is driven in some ways by the Sino-US competition, as it were, and of course India is close to the United States, and Russia is close to China. At the same time, India and Russia has a certain partnership. So, given this kind of a geopolitical context, have I understood you correctly that India and Russia could potentially use their friendship and relationship in order to hedge their bets against the other two hegemons, United States of America and China, as it were. So, there, in other words, it is useful for India to get close to Russian Federation, given the wake of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, etc., so as to sort of, have a plank ready vis-a-vis the Chinese aggression, as it were. Or have I got that completely wrong?
No. Being a well-trained academic expert par excellence, I think you've summarized my confusing words into exactly the paradigm that it should be. So, in fact, you have spoken what I was trying to express in much, much better words. It's true. I mean, that's exactly what I mean. I wish I had found those words to express my thoughts.
Nandan, I was quite struck by Sergei Lavrov's words the other day when he said that India proved that it is a sovereign country while it stood up to the United States, against the potential U.S. sanctions against the Indian purchase of S-400 systems from Russia. But he also said in the same breath that they're quite uneasy about the Indo-Pacific, and he calls it the Asia-Pacific, and uneasy about the Quad, etc. In that context, of course, he does not see the Indian sovereignty or Indian sovereign choice, as it were. So the question that I have for you is, how seriously do you assess the Russian objections to Indo-Pacific or the Quad or Indo-US relationship, as it were?
Happymon, I've heard you well in the past say one thing, that one is words, the other is actions, and actions speak louder than words. So I would say that you have to look at what the Russians say and what they do. And if you look at that, you will recognize that they have distinct interests in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, that today their primary adversary is the United States. Today, China is not the enemy number one like it was during the 70s and 80s, or even if never it was enemy number one, it was an important adversary who was in cahoots with the United States at that stage. So there is no reason for Russia today to publicly take steps to alienate China, because China is also facing pressure from the same adversary that Russia is facing. So it is not going to publicly issue statements condemning China's bases in Tajikistan, or saying that China is making incursions into areas of Russian influence. It will take actions to try and stop that. So one of the actions it's taking, for example, to show its independence from China, is it participated in military maneuvers with the ASEAN just, I think, a week or 10 days ago. You see?
That's right.
And it is Indonesia that sneakily brought the Russians in, and the Chinese are deeply unhappy about it. So Russia continues to supply and maintain submarines of Vietnam. Vietnam, who is it going to use against? Oh, China is the only adversary that Vietnam has at this point. We have a nuclear submarine from Russia on lease. Who are we using it against? Definitely not the United States. So again, the Russian actions in many ways speak much, much louder than the words. And even if you go by words, you have Lavrov, one level, he has a job, he has to project a particular view. So I fully understand that. But you look at President Putin. When President Putin is asked to speak on the Indo-Pacific, he is far more moderate. In fact, in 2019, he virtually almost endorsed Prime Minister Modi's speech at Shangri-La. The only difference is that the Russian formulation, and it is reflected incidentally again in this joint statement, the only thing is that the Russian formulation removes the word rule-based order, which we tend to use. It removes rule-based orders because Lavrov famously, if you remember, asked, who makes those rules? If we are not on the table, then we are on the menu. So if we don't make the rules, why should we accept them? It's as simple as that. So I am not, I'm not unduly pessimistic about Russia's position on the Indo-Pacific and the Quad. I also think that Russian interests, strategic interest, will drive them into greater cooperation with India and other middle powers in the Indo-Pacific for some more time. And more than that, I also think that Russians are beginning to see, just as we are beginning to see, growing complementarities in the concept of Greater Eurasia and the Indo-Pacific. And in fact, again, I'm referring back to the joint statement, is we are talking about intensifying consultations about these complementarities.
Nandan, talking about the Eurasian sort of landmass, as it were, I mean, you also referred to earlier the Chabahar port and access to Central Asia through Iran and Afghanistan. A lot of people in India would sort of ask this question: what is there in Central Asia that we have to sort of bend over backwards to get there? I mean, especially with the new situation that has arisen in Afghanistan. The Taliban is back there, the support of the Pakistanis. China is, of course, the big player in the sort of Eurasian landmass. You have, for instance, the SCO, almost virtually. One could make the argument controlled by the Chinese. Russia is reaching out to China is reaching out to Russia. China is reaching out to Pakistan. Iranians are not too happy with India for a certain a number of understandable reasons. So we have a problem when it comes to reaching out to Central Asia. One, on the other hand, what is in Central Asia that we should be so attracted to, so that we bend over backwards to get there?
I think that is a very, very good question, because there is confusion in the Indian strategic space about Central Asia and its importance. And you have both arguments. One is the nostalgia-driven ones who speak, we have civilizational ties with that place. And, we exported Buddhism, they exported Babur. So, that kind of thing. But the point is that there is something today. If you look at it from today's world, Central Asia is important to us because that is the first step to stop hegemony in the Asian continent. I'm not even talking about Eurasia. I'm talking of Asia. If Central Asia falls completely into China's lap, you will very soon find that the Middle East follows, and then the Russians and the Indians will be completely isolated. And Russia is an important player. And if the West keeps pushing Russia as it is doing now, the Russians will have no choice but to literally formally ally with China. In which case, now think of geography with us on the tip of the continent, more in the ocean, we are going to be completely isolated. So it is not in our interest. It is fundamentally not in our interest to be isolated from the greater Eurasian, what I call supercontinent, from London to Vladivostok, area. We need to engage more. We need to engage more with Eastern Europe. We need to engage more with Central Europe. All these are things that, we earlier did not have the bandwidth, but I think we now cannot use that as an excuse anymore. Lack of human and financial resources, we don't have the time for all that. We need to reach out to these areas if we want to stop hegemony from emerging on the supercontinent.
Thank you so much. I think that's a fascinating way of looking at it. The other question that I have really is about this China-India standoff and the role that Russia can play. Traditionally, when India and Pakistan had crisis situations, it was the United States of America that sort of tried to make peace between Pakistan and India. In 2020, during the Ladakh standoff, you saw Rajnath Singh, so the defense minister, rushing to Moscow and placing order for weapons, etc. Do you think Russia would be able and willing to play a role should there be a repeat of the crisis that we saw in 2020 between India and China in the years to come?
Happymon, I have to do a little bit sort of a historical tour here. Recently, there is a lot of distortion, literally distortion of history taking place amongst international experts, including Indian ones. We start talking about how Russia betrayed us in the 62 war, right? Russia did not betray us. In fact, it is in October 62, before the war, that we signed the MiG deal, right? So there are, if you look on the ground at historical facts, you will discover that in 61, it is Russia that supported us on Goa. After all, India took over Goa through force. In the United Nations, there was a resolution to condemn us. Who stopped it? It's not only on Kashmir that the Russians have supported us. Let me take you further down. 1971. Why did we sign the treaty with the Soviet Union? We were not afraid of Pakistan. We were happy to deal with Pakistan. But we wanted to stop any intervention in that situation by China or the United States. And the Russians played that role, by the way, willingly. Just in case people forget. They signed up, they completely cut off their relationship for the next 30 years with Pakistan. There was nothing from 1971 onwards till 1991, next 20 years, there was nothing that Russia did with Pakistan. So Russians have shown us their intent with us. It is for us to recognize, I'm not saying historical reasons. People changed allies. Russia were enemies with China. Today they are almost bosom buddies. All that happens. But all I'm saying is that there is a abiding Russian strategic interest in South Asia, and the fulcrum of that South Asian interest is India. And India should use that as leverage to develop a healthy relationship with Russia.
That's right. A lot of people are also concerned about...
I didn't answer your fundamental question. Coming to today's conflict with China, I get so involved with history, I forget about the present day. I'm so sorry. Yeah. No, let's look back. Again, 2020. Where is the first meeting that takes place between the Indian defense or foreign minister and the Chinese? Takes place in Moscow. Where do we run when we want to ensure that during that conflict, arms supplies to us are not interrupted? Who gives us assurances that they will not interrupt any arms supplies? It is again the Russians. Someone who is not any fan of Russia recently did a calculation and said that if today India was to fight a war with China, 85% of the equipment that it uses would be of Russian origin. So,
That's right.
you see, it is important. And the Russians, despite Chinese pressure, have maintained and in some cases expedited deliveries of weapon systems to us throughout the crisis. They have delivered the S-400, which the former Indian ambassador, Mr. Venkatesh Verma, who was in Moscow day before yesterday on a program on Doordarshan, described as a game changer on the Western Front for us. So, the Russians are fully aware of what they're doing. And yet they continue doing so. And the Chinese don't for a second believe that the Chinese are just sitting back and enjoying it. They are putting pressure on Russia. They are putting pressure on Russia to try and stop all this. But the Russians are going ahead. So there is a statement of intent. But are there any words behind it? No, there are no words. Now, what do we judge? The actions or the words? Because Lavrov says bad things about Indo-Pacific throughout the same crisis. But, those are just words. The actions speak completely different.
Nandan, I think the real difficulty comes because of the sort of the great power rivalry at the apex of it at some level, which is also between Russia and the United States. India needs the United States, and for a variety of reasons, including for checkmating the Chinese aggression. India also needs, as you just correctly pointed out, the Russians for precisely the same reasons and others. Now, as we speak, the Russian troops are on the Ukrainian border, and the US estimates suggest that the Russians may actually encroach into Ukraine in the months to come. We don't know how accurate that is. But the larger question that I'm trying to ask is the how much can we say, how immune are India-Russia ties from the vagaries of the US-Russia relationships or confrontation, as it were?
No, there is no dispute. The most important relationship for India today is the one with the United States. I completely agree with you. You use the phrase that we need the United States to checkmate China. I will again show you geography and ask you, can you checkmate China without Russia? Just look at geography and imagine Russia with its natural resources and its brains and its capacities, human resources, wedded to a China. Nobody can defeat them. It doesn't matter if India and US have a absolute alliance. You're not going to be able to prevent the emergence of a new great superpower if the Russians and the Chinese join hands. So the issue here is, I think, very simple. Yes, the United States was a superpower. Unfortunately, the battle is on in Washington. There is a civil war going on between two different views. One is saying we are not the hegemon anymore. We need to understand and adjust to it. The other saying, let us recapture our hegemony, our primacy, right? These two views, unless that civil war is over, the rest of the world will have to keep hedging their bets. We'll have to wait and see who emerges victorious in that one. But the reality is, whichever way we look at it, containment of China is not really on the cards. You can try and reduce the salience of China in international affairs, try and keep it down a bit, but you're not going to really succeed in containing it. The drivers of Chinese growth are entirely within China. The same as the drivers of Indian growth are within India. They are not in India's foreign relations. It is the Indian people and our economy that will drive our growth if we at last get down to doing the job we are supposed to do.
Right. I think what requires at this point of time from India is perhaps a great amount of balancing, as it were, smart balancing between the United States and Russia. As you correctly pointed out, we need both these countries. There's no question about it. But how much agility and sophistication that we show in our diplomacy is something that one will have to wait and see. I mean, going by what we have been witnessing over the last few months and years, I think I'm convinced that India has been balancing these two great powers quite well for safeguarding our national interests. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Nandan. Great insights from you, and I'm now convinced that it is for no reason. Well, there's a great amount of reason as to why people refer to you as the best Russia hand that we have in New Delhi.
You're
Thank you
making
so
me
much
blush
for
now.
joining me today.
I said, you're making me blush now. I'm nowhere near the best, but thank you so much for inviting
Thank you,
me.
Nandan.
Thank you for patiently listening to me.
Great insights. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for watching us, watching this show. And we end here. Have a great day.
Thank you.